everyone, I'm Leanna and this is Nima, and today we'll be talking about the Long Island serial killer Rex Heuermann.
Yeah, big news. This is one of the longest running, at least unsolved serial killer cases. And, it's gotten a lot of attention. It was a subject of a book, a Netflix documentary, and we don't see a lot of serial killers nowadays anymore because of advances in law enforcement technology. But obviously, in cases that we've talked about actually on our podcast involving sex workers or folks that, don't have that same family support, we have seen serial killers act and be successful, unfortunately.
Well, I'm glad you started off with that because we do talk about this on our podcast a lot, right? We've sort of seen a decline in serial killers, traditional serial killers, if you will, and school shooters, right, are now sort of taken up that area. And so I think this is why the story is so fascinating, right? You have a serial killer who is, an architect, he's doing interviews, he has a wife and kids, and he almost fits that profile, right? Because most serial killers are your boy next door types. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, oftentimes, obviously, a white male, also a mass shooter too. But really what's sort of significant here is the technology. And I mean, we've talked about it, that law enforcement now has such a significant advantage. And let's see really how they finally got to Heuermann, right? He was using burner phones, so they're able to sort of match those burner phones, and apparently he had like 7 of these burner phones. But they were also matching those phones to the cell site. I mean, if you take a burner phone, you got to leave your own phone at home, right? That was part of the problem, right? He wasn't using his phone to contact the victims, but he was taking his phone with them to the sites of the alleged assaults and the murders. And then, of course, DNA, it's really changed the game over the past
And I love how, just with this case alone, we see that growth, right? I mean, the reason it's taken so long for them to be able to pinpoint a suspect is because, they located the strands of hair, and because of the location of the bodies, right, it had been weathered, so they weren't able to really tie the DNA from those strands to anyone really until years later. I believe it was just a few years ago where they used new techniques that have improved over the years to be able to link the hair, which actually is the wife's hair, to...
Yeah, so I think one of them was his hair, and then the 3 that have been charged so far, I expect additional charges. We have about 10, 11 victims. But at least 3 have the wife's hair, which is pretty interesting as well. Obviously, we know the wife's not a suspect. The wife and kids were out of the state. So apparently, Heuermann, what he would do is when the family was out of town,
on vacation.
Yeah, he'd get on Craigslist, find these young, vulnerable women, sexually assault and kill them.
So, as a former prosecutor, would you say it's common for law enforcement to maybe locate a piece of evidence like the wife's hair, for example, and then just kind of work backwards, right? Because it's like a puzzle, right? They're putting it together. They're trying to figure out who's involved, who's not. Is there an accomplice? Is that common, or is this just unique to this situation?
Well, it's becoming more common, and one of the biggest changes we're seeing are what we call these sort of familial matches, right? So someone like Heuermann, no criminal history, his DNA is probably not in the system. I assume the wife's isn't either, right? So what law enforcement now is doing is, and we've seen this with the Golden State Killer, or I did Dateline for a Gone Girl, Sherry Papini, but what they're doing is they're using DNA of family members who are in the system, right, and sort of working their way backwards. So a lot of people don't like it. Folks are concerned with privacy and civil rights, but it's really given law enforcement the upper hand because if they get any type of hair or blood or anything like that, and if they can't match it to you, who knows what our family members have done, right?
Right. 100%. And so I was actually reading that what they do is when they test like a hair strand or, some kind of a DNA sample, they're able to rule out that like 99.98% of the population can't be a match. And that's how they kind of start zeroing in onto whoever that particular suspect is. But interestingly, it was the sample that they got off of a pizza that he discarded outside of his office, I think, or his house.
Pizza crust, right?
Crust.
That was his DNA, and for the lawyers or law students out there, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy, right? Once you throw that trash away, cops and agents, they can go dumpster diving and they can get your DNA from it.
Right.
So
we actually did a TikTok on that, so follow if you don't. But I thought that was really interesting how it was that little pizza crust that really just kind of zeroed in on this guy.
Yeah, and then it's interesting. I mean, just talking about other cases, right? Brian Koberger, obviously, it was the vehicle, the Hyundai Elantra, but in this case as well, it was the vehicle that really gave law enforcement that first lead, right? For one of the victims, he stayed overnight. Apparently, he was planning on going back the next day. So they have those communications with the victims, and it was the vehicle and an eyewitness identifying that vehicle that gave law enforcement the first break here.
Well, here also, you have law enforcement's on this guy's tail, right? And again, I assume this is something really common. They've been following him and tapping his phones and whatnot. And he's still contacting sex workers, right? And so...
Well, he has all these different emails, right? He has emails, he has burner phones. And, look, I mean, he wasn't as careful as he should have been because... Let's talk about one thing we haven't so far, which is a great law enforcement tool, and that's that internet search history, right? So in the past 14 months, 200 different searches about the Long Island serial killer. What does law enforcement know? Are they close? What's the task force doing? I mean, he's obsessed with it. So either he is a true crime junkie, like some of us are, or he has something to do with these murders. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we talked about this recently, and now the name escapes me, but we had another serial killer that you and I spoke about who was doing the same thing, like just feverishly Googling himself to see, like, what did they find out and where they're at with the investigation. So I don't know if that's, like, a true crime junkie or that's just someone who's like, man, are they onto me or what's happening?
So. Yeah, so it's a pretty strong circumstantial case. I mean, obviously, his DNA is at the scene of the crime, the murders. I mean, it's not going to get better than that. His cell phone is in the area. You got the internet search history. It's going to be a very tough case to defend. Obviously, he's going to have to say that he's just basically a big fan, you know? Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I mean, the problem is the search history is bad. It has a lot of kind of searches for dungeon porn and some other deviant stuff. Apparently there's some child pornographies on there. So, those child porn cases are very difficult to defend. I mean, once you have it, I mean, you're done. So, I think he's going down.
Would you agree that, so there's multiple bodies, right? So they found 11 in total. They're linking 3 to him, and then there's 1 who they haven't confirmed. Prosecution is a pretty strong case. And if they're not 100% or as close to 100% sure about the 4th body, then it could maybe shatter their case. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, you think about these cases, why do they only charge 3? We think there's as many as 11. I think, prosecutors kind of want to take the sure thing right now. They got the DNA at the scene. Some of these bodies, they weren't found for months or even years later. I mean, some of the bodies they found where they were looking for other bodies. So, I don't know what sort of condition the remains were and whether they can positively ID him. And these types of questions people always ask me, is there any possibility of a deal? And I think, obviously New York is not a death penalty state, but you can't really give a discount in these types of cases. I mean, these are serial killer cases. These are life without the possibility of parole. But sometimes, if prosecutors talk to the victims' families and they want some sort of closure, they may, and I'm not saying I'm going to do this, but just to sort of think ahead, they may offer someone like Heuermann the possibility of parole, saying, listen, it's life, but you're going to get the possibility of parole if you come clean, identify the bodies, give the family some closure so they can really do a proper burial.
Right. Well, the other bodies don't even fit, like just the way they were, where they were located, they were in the area, but, one of them is a toddler, the other one is presumed to be the mother, and then the last one is a male. So that's why I think they're really not honing in on those bodies yet until they're confirmed, because it just doesn't fit sort of the serial killer, the common sort of, I think he wrapped them up and...
Yeah, and we've done, obviously, a lot of these serial killer podcasts, and usually you're right. You have a typical target for these serial killers. And, I mean, once in a while you'll get, like, a Night Stalker type that was just kind of been anyone. But usually...
Those are rare.
Yeah, they're more rare. Usually you get sort of a particular victim.
Right. And then I think, lastly, we should talk about the... what do you think? Is he going to get first degree? Is he going to get second? Because they're gunning for both.
Yeah. I think this is a first degree type case, right? One, maybe you can argue second degree. So, first degree is that sort of premeditation, right? Obviously, murder is murder, but first degree in most states has that mandatory life. And whereas the second degree might be 25 to life. And I really think, I mean, this is premeditated, right? Your wife goes out of town, you go. Yeah. I mean, the guy has like 200 guns. I mean, you know, this guy was plotting and planning. I mean, this, I think that's textbook first-degree premeditation.
Well, even so, at his age, he's probably spending the rest of his life in prison, even if he gets, 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a life sentence for him, so.
Right. So, you know, I think this is one of the cases that we're going to be following very closely. I think it has the entire country, like, just fascinated, and everyone's tuning in every minute to see if there's new updates. So stay tuned. I'm sure we'll be doing more podcasts, YouTubes, and certainly TikToks. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.